Like most of her friends, Emily enjoys her life, her hobbies and school. Unlike most of her friends, Emily is profoundly deaf. This film follows a day in Emily's life, exploring how her school helps her access the mainstream curriculum. Emily's parents chose an oral route for their daughter, and she attends Priory School in Lewes, East Sussex.
Began to suspect when she was about 6 months old. She wasn't our first child, we already had a 5-year-old boy. And it became very noticeable that when he came home from school, because he was at school full-time by the time I had her, when he came home from school he was just so noisy, and Emily just didn't flinch at all. So I really began to suspect something was wrong then.
Emily's got a profound loss. Basically it means if she wasn't wearing hearing aids, she would probably only just about hear a pneumatic drill next to her. With her hearing aids, she can hear a lot more, but it isn't what you or I would hear.
I can't imagine on my son not be deaf because my life would probably shine on other people.
Inevitably, with someone born deaf like Emily, there's going to be a language delay that she probably won't ever quite catch up on, but at least she's accessing a full secondary school curriculum.
Although Emily's school has a special unit, the strategies used to help her are often surprisingly simple.
I mean, the most common mistake is shouting and assuming that perhaps they're also stupid rather than just they can't hear you. And actually, if you shout, then that changes the lip patterns that you use.
It can also be just as bad for the hearing impaired kid if, you know, the teacher talks to you really, really slowly.
So the best thing to do is just not even speaking slower, but just speaking clearly.
Not facing the board when they're talking, getting the children's attention before they address a question to them.
Just little things like in the class that the teacher is standing in the same place.
Often they miss out on the contributions of other students, and teachers can help in that regard by repeating what the other children have said.
Over the page, the pen runs faster than the wind's white step over...
The first lesson of the day is English. Relying heavily on lip reading, this could be problematic for Emily, but careful support means she's coping well.
My English teacher is quite hard to lip read, but sometimes when I go home down, I ask her to go on something like that. But most of the time, she will come on, but I'm okay, something like that. Sometimes they don't quite sweet, I go on down, that really typical don't quit, but sometimes when I go on down, what she gonna come on, bye-bye.
Teachers that get it right will be ones that will talk directly to the hearing impaired child and make sure that they've been understood, and they'll repeat anything if necessary.
So I'm going to put everybody in the room in for the higher exam. So are we clear about that? Emily, we're putting you in for the higher exam. Okay?
There's a lot of note-taking for hearing impaired children in a secondary school, particularly in English, things like when they're doing poetry, like this morning's lesson. And it allows the lesson to run more smoothly than if you're having to constantly write everything up on the board. And that would sort of hold back everyone, really.
She's good to me bad. So bad writing everything for me, so I copy her. That makes it more easier for me, because without her it would struggling very hard, because she's good to be quickly my own with her.
Self-referential. The poet is talking about herself and the act of writing poetry.
She's quite pacey in her lessons, but I actually think Emily prefers that.
The poet's talking about the act of writing poetry.
Once a fortnight, Emily has a speech and language session away from her classmates.
Difficult. Speech problem, and quite difficult. to understand English well. I need to get more. I need to get the background and I need my speech. Make it better.
Pear, pear, bear, shoe, shoe, two, pea, tea.
Most of the time we're trying to be contingent to her language. So I saturate her with as much language as she can take, that she can understand or not quite understand, so that she's developing that all the time.
In the stepping, my speech with the banking and not people struggle to hunt down what I'm saying. But they help me to improve my speech.
You remember before we tried words that started with a sk, so an S and a K sound, the sk, and some of the sn sounds. So what would you rather do? Would you rather just say them, or do you want to?
Something.
You'd rather say them.
Yeah.
Good.
Scat. Boom.
Lovely.
Skeleton.
Good. Brilliant. Okay. Do you think that's a bit easier than before?
No.
Yeah. Bit easier. That's good.
Emily doesn't need support in all her lessons. Next up, Emily's passion, dance.
I love to dance. I think it's really fun, really easy. Then it's because we have to work. Then we take my dance.
Emily's got all the social skills that are needed for her to be able to do that, and she's made friends really well, and they're very supportive of her.
If they're going down to us, everyone can know everyone who does.
And if people don't talk to her, she'll tend to talk to them. So, you know, and that's what you need to do.
Next on the timetable is science, a lesson that's got some specific problems. So how is Emily supported here?
What things you know that you can do that would speed up a chemical reaction?
Sometimes it's quite hard because when people go through that, we can go on because if people work at people, it's really hard because everyone is going down. But the good thing is good because I know everyone in class and I want them what's going on and they're telling me what's going on. So my papa.
Occasionally checking in makes all the difference.
Know what you're doing? Know what you're doing?
One of the problems in the science lab is that the acoustic environment isn't that good. You get a lot of reverberation, a lot of echo, and that's because they're not carpeted. But you can get around these things by, like the teacher's done here, a lot of visual rather than verbal work in the classroom, demonstrations and practicals.
What about if one of your reactants is a solid? Chloe.
Increase the surface area? She likes it a lot. The bird here. And a girl not up to bird. That's that.
How fast the reaction goes. That's my clue. Which ones speed up the reaction?
Support could prove alienating if it's not handled in the right way. There's a fine line between too much and too little.
How effective they are.
It's so as not to draw attention to the fact that they are being supported and singled out. I wouldn't normally sit directly with the person I'm supporting, but do it sort of on a more whole class basis and just make sure, check in every now and then.
And if they feel that they're being singled out by having to sit at the front all the time or having to sit directly in front of the teacher, then I think we sometimes make compromises so that they feel comfortable in the classroom, and they can relate to their friends just as much as anyone else can.
I would feel about to feel maybe sorry for the people, because maybe we could be fair of them that we hold me with them.
They're the two things you're aiming from doing the experiment.
No matter how careful teachers are, problems can still arise.
I got a problem inside because it's really hard. Bit suckling within the quiz, and I got time coming up. I'm a bit nervous about it, but I think I need to work harder.
Time is put aside for Emily to ensure she doesn't fall behind.
Mum said you wanted some help with your science, is that right?
Yeah.
When you used 2 molar acid with the calcium carbonate, how many times did you do that?
No, 2.
Why did you do it twice and not once?
Because what the difference between...
Yeah, it actually makes your results more accurate. When these collide with each other...
One-to-one tuition and a visual approach help everything along.
Right, and there's more likely to be a change in that one than that one. So 60 what? 60 bananas, 60 seconds? Cubed, yeah, all right. So that's the volume there. Okay, what's this?
With the day over and exams approaching fast, Emily is doing well. What's made mainstream school work for her?
I would say that the reason Emily's been successful is I would tend to think children that do well in a mainstream school, or deaf children that do well in a mainstream school, tend to have a certain personality. Now, some people might argue, well, you're not born with a personality, it's something you develop. And she's had a lot of good support, and she's had some excellent parenting, and she's benefited from all of that. And she's got a lot of strategies, not only for coping here, but for coping outside. So that's why she's succeeded.
Originally, when she went to Lewis Priory, it was a question that we hoped that maybe she could scrape through and do a few GCSEs and get some reasonable marks. The fact of the matter is she's done extremely well. She's keeping up with most of her peers at school, and the expectations are that she will get some very good grades in her GCSEs.
Hopefully it can really good time, because over 5 years I'm working really hard. So hopefully we can time.